Hello, welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin. As always, this episode is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. Scaling your customer storytelling is difficult. As marketers, you're busy, you have a million things to do, and sometimes case studies and testimonials fall by the wayside. Testimonial Hero exists to help you effortlessly scale your customer storytelling through video testimonials and written case studies. Learn more at testimonialhero.com. On this episode, I'm joined by Georgiana Laudi, who is the co-founder and CEO of Forget the Funnel. And we're talking about customer-led growth, specifically around how you can do better customer research, why focusing on jobs to be done matters, and how customer-led growth can lead to higher retention and expansion. Hey, Gia, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Dustin.
Yeah, thanks for being here. It's funny, we were saying we kind of play in similar circles here, but haven't connected before. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Agree.
And we're obviously going to talk about customer-led growth. But something you said that I thought was really interesting before this is you mentioned you should be focused on getting more customers without more marketing. And all the marketers are probably throwing their hands in there wondering what you're talking about. So let's explain that.
Yeah, and somebody having a marketing background saying that often doesn't make sense either. Long history in marketing and kind of a weird thing to say, but mostly what I mean by that is understanding who you're serving is fundamentally, the most important thing. And I think a lot of companies, not just marketing departments, but I think a lot of companies are focused on sort of filling the top of the funnel without understanding who they're actually serving and optimizing their customer experience. I'll just throw customer experience term in there for a second. They're focused on bringing more people through the front door versus the experience they're providing once the customers have walked through it. And a lot of money is being left on the table. I know I don't need to convince you, but it is an easy trap to fall into when you're looking for growth is sort of, invest more in top of funnel marketing when the fundamentals are often what is actually needed.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's nice to get people to the site, but you have to have the right people at the site and you have to figure out who those right people are and what to tell them. So is that's right, kind of what you're referring to? Like a lot of that top of funnel is just too broad and bringing in maybe too many people into the top of it.
100%. So generally the companies that we're working with, they recognize that something may be slightly off. Typically what we're seeing happen is that companies are focused on bringing too broad of a spectrum of customers through the front door. And at a certain point, it can start to look like stalled growth, or, we can't influence our conversion rates on our website or our activation rates if, we're a product-led sort of organization. And it starts to feel harder and harder over time. And it is not super obvious what might be off. So a lot of companies that we're working with, once we dig into actually learning from their best customers, which is like a critically important thing to do, we learn from their best customers. What we often find is they've been bringing in too broad of a group of customers through the front door. And so they're not in a position to be able to use really resonant messaging and positioning, or even a customer experience that's going to make a lot of sense. When I say a customer experience, I mean like, a product onboarding experience or a customer onboarding experience that is in the, highlighting the right things in the right order. We talk a lot about like hierarchy of messaging, but it's not just messaging. It's like hierarchy of introducing their product and helping them get to moments of value. It's really hard to optimize a customer experience when you're trying to optimize for everyone. There's that like old adage, when you're marketing to everybody, you're marketing to no one. But, and I know that everybody's familiar with that, but it is such a huge problem even today, even though we all know that that's true. So what we often find when we're working with teams is that they're bringing sometimes 2, 3, even sometimes 4 totally different groups of customers or segments of customers through their front door, unbeknownst to them. They think they're targeting a particular persona, but really who they're bringing in is people with very, very different problems that need solving. And so we basically work with teams to identify what those different groups are, whether or not they should deprioritize one and, prioritize another and really optimize around that one, which is generally what we're making recommendations to do. So that's kind of where we get into this situation of like, you've been bringing these different groups of customers through the front door. These appear to be great customers when they first come through. And I can give a couple of examples because I recognize I'm being a little bit abstract, but just a better understanding of who your best customers are and what actually matters to them is going to grease all the wheels downstream, right? Your website conversion rate, your product onboarding, your activation, your engagement rates, your retention, your expansion rates. If you have that deep understanding on who it is that you're serving, what they're trying to accomplish, what they actually really, really care about, then everything else becomes so much easier. And the companies that we work with are generally just spreading themselves too thin and don't have enough sort of clarity and focus in the team. And so people are, trying to do too many things for too many people. And, it can feel like pushing a boulder up a hill sometimes.
Yeah, that niching down to like, it can be a little scary, I think, for people, because we've lived in this environment for so many years where it's how large is the TAM and then how many millions of dollars am I going to give you to capture all of that? And if that were that easy, we would all be very, very rich. It's not that easy.
Totally.
And as a marketer, there is nothing worse than trying to market to everyone, because you get this diluted, watered down, buzzwordy, you might even throw in the word synergy or something dumb like that to try to address everyone. And that just does not work. So I'm curious then how, I guess before we talk into how you actually do the research and learn, is that an objection you run into where people are like, oh, I don't want to exclude this group of people, or I don't want to niche down, and they're a bit afraid about it?
So, I mean, maybe it would be helpful one of my issues is that this happens so often with the teams that we work with, where we identify these different groups of customers. It's often hard for me to like lean on just like one example because there's so many.
Yeah.
But I'll give just one. So we worked with a team a little while ago that their growth had stalled out for about a year, and they poured money into marketing. They poured money into content marketing, into ads, into their CS team, their onboarding team. They invested a ton in trying to move these revenue numbers, but their revenue was flat for a number of years. Eventually they came to the point where they're like, we have to figure out what's actually going on here. We need to dig deeper. And so we started working with this team, and we segmented their best customers. So they have to be paying, they've got to be happy, engaged with the product, and they need to have signed up not so long ago that they don't remember what life was like before. So there's a recency factor that's important as well. So we segment down that group of customers. And what we found when we talked to them was that there were two very different groups of customers coming through the front door. One was this like loud majority who were, very vocal, talked to CS a lot, were very happy initially, but also needed quite a bit of handholding when coming through the front door. And then there was this quiet group of customers who were just flying in under the radar, never really talked to CS. And when we pulled these two groups apart, after discovering these two groups existed, when we pulled those two groups apart, what we realized was that the LTV of this second group was so much higher, and the cost to acquire them was so much lower. And that is because of the fundamental problems that these two groups were trying to solve. So one was trying to grow their audience, and the other one was trying to automate their systems. Sounds completely different, but actually this company had been serving both of these groups of customers since the company's inception. And so they just sort of doubled down on that same marketing strategy. And so when we brought these two groups of customers to the leadership team, it was very, very obvious that like, oh, these are actually our best customers. They're the easiest to acquire. They inherently understand what we do. They have a line item on their budget for our solution. They don't need a lot of hand-holding, like I said, and they stick around for longer as well. Like their retention rates were quite a bit higher, and their expansion rates were quite a bit higher as well. So it doesn't take a lot of convincing. Like if that was your situation, and I can give you, 10 more examples like that. If you're a leadership team and you get told that you've got these two groups of customers, one that's draining CS's time, costs a ton, their churn is higher and the LTV isn't quite as high. It doesn't take a lot of convincing to help reorient that team around that group of customers that actually is higher LTV. Even if they were bringing through fewer through the front door, ultimately results in higher revenue anyway. So, I'll say it doesn't take a ton of convincing when you sort of get to look at the customer group through that, your segment of customers through that sort of lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're tying it to, what the leadership team cares about, which is revenue and LTV and everything there. So you mentioned there, those are obviously some of the things you look into when segmenting, but I found anytime looking at a customer base, it's probably going to be pretty diverse. So like just even looking at ours, right? I know who our core market is, but there's a lot of sub ones. And
Yeah.
if I were to go through that to try to determine who is our best fit customers, there's a million ways to look at it. Industry
Totally.
size, how much they spent, propensity to spend. So how do you start that? I guess is the question. Like, what do you start
Yeah.
at when you're looking at it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we lean on the jobs to be done approach
Hmm.
for this type of segmentation. It is particularly advantageous for products like yours that have a large breadth of, customers that may have a need for a solution like yours. So again, like horizontal products benefit extremely well from an approach like jobs to be done.
Hmm.
But in our experience, every type, even very niche products, benefit from this approach. So I actually wrote an article recently, and I posted it to LinkedIn about like the relationship between jobs to be done, personas, and ICP. And these terms get thrown around a lot, and they're inherently what their job is to help us think about like how to segment our customers in meaningful ways. And we like to start with jobs to be done because jobs to be done gives us insight into the sort of the moment and the trigger that leads somebody to seek out a solution like yours. So if you think about a horizontal, horizontal type of product like a Typeform or a Slack or
Yeah.
a Testimonial Hero as a good example too. There's a lot of different personas, right, that may need and want to lean on something like testimonials or social proof. As an example, I mean, obviously, we think about marketing, but like marketing could look completely different at a bunch of different, like if we talk about ICP, right? Like different sizes
Hmm.
of companies, like there's a huge, huge variation there. So jobs to be done is really, really helpful in thinking about what leads somebody, what's the context in which somebody is in where they first experience the need for a solution like ours, regardless of their job title, regardless of the size of the company that they're at, regardless of the revenue band their company falls into, or the number of employees, which is the types of things that we would look at if we were trying to build out like an ICP or an ideal customer profile. So jobs to be done again is about that context and understanding what's motivating somebody to make that decision, what are some of their objections and deal breakers, and what helps sort of, what are the pushes and pulls in their decision making process, what is it about your solution that convinces them to choose you over all of the others? What are the ultimate like desired outcomes that they're looking to drive, regardless of persona, regardless of company size. So again, especially for a horizontal product or a product that could serve into many different ICPs, jobs to be
Hmm.
done is inherently that like context, that why, that fundamental sort of understanding of what are customers trying to accomplish with our product that make all the other segmentation methods much more useful. So we tend to start with jobs to be done, and then we move into identifying like ICP attributes, or if personas or something that are needed for messaging or onboarding or things like that. Then we would explore those later. So that's generally how we tackle it, is the jobs to be done methodology. We're huge fans of the approach. Bob Mesta, who's one of the original sort of architects of the jobs to be done framework, wrote the foreword on our book. So he's like really, really core. Jobs to be done is really core to what we do.
That makes a lot of sense, and because you see people skip that a lot. They skip the research stage, or maybe even worse, the CEO or founder kind of guesses at the jobs to be done,
Mm-hmm.
which is maybe why they created the company. They're like, "Oh, I'm solving for this," but then when you actually talk to the customer base, it's not at all. It's
Yeah,
entirely different thing. So how do you dig in for that customer research? Is it survey based, talking to customers, all of the above? What does that look like?
yeah. So what you're describing happens a ton, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that in the early days, right? People
Hmm.
create products that founders, found companies to solve the problems that they had all the time. And I think that that's a very like viable way to start a company and even launch a product. Obviously, customer discovery is like hugely important to do in the early days. but all to say that, yeah, we do work with a lot of companies that have relied on the sort of founders or early, founding teams' understanding of who the target customer is. And eventually we get to a point where the product has evolved, the market has evolved, the team has evolved to a point where that sort of founding teams or founders sort of understanding of that customer has just sort of dissolved and become less meaningful over time. And any one of those three things can happen. There's many things that can impact how your target customer and how your ideal customer can change over time. So basically how we tackle that in terms of like tactically, how do we tackle that is we identify that group of customers, like I mentioned before, that are happily paying, they are engaged with the product, they get a ton of value. We often describe them as the customers that you would have to pry your product out of their cold dead hands, just to get really visceral about it. Yeah. But like, who are those customers that you would clone? And let's zoom in just on those customers and identify who they are, how many are there. Depending on the answer to how many are there, we might employ a couple of different, research methods. At the end of the day, nothing is going to outperform interviews. And I know that when we say customer interviews, people are like, oh, that's such a big ask. It takes too long. It's such a skill. And all those things are totally, totally true. I often, I empathize a lot with teams who are like, we don't have anybody that knows how to run customer interviews. And so do we really want to bother our customers with this? And in those cases, I would say just outsource the interview parts to, skilled interviewers. And I don't say that as being sort of self-serving, just legitimately, like whoever it is, work with somebody who knows how to do interviews so that when you do run those interviews, they're as high quality as possible and you get as much out of them as possible. And in general, the other reason not to be scared of interviews is that you only need about a dozen, like 10 to 12 interviews to start seeing those patterns emerge, where you end up at the point where you're like, okay, I'm seeing like real themes pop up here, where you start to feel a level of confidence that if you've done your segmenting well, you will see those patterns emerge and they will turn into really usable insights for you. So when we work with teams, we run 10 to 12 interviews. Again, there's a couple of different methods to getting to those, who should those interviews be with? And, we can dig into that. But essentially, we use interviews to identify the customer's jobs to be done. After that, we often identify 2 to 3 different jobs to be done within that group of customers. Sometimes it's 1, it's usually 2 or 3. And then we're having a conversation about like which one of these customers do we want to prioritize. So, another example of a team we worked with where we ran interviews, we actually ran surveys first, qualitative surveys to pre-qualify for interviews. Then we ran interviews, and what we discovered was that there were 2 very different groups of customers who were showing up, those that were like earlier in their business development and were needing a solution like theirs. It was an invoicing tool for the first time. And then another group where they were firing an old solution in order to hire this new one. And with that company, we met with the team, the leadership team, and made a decision to focus on those that were firing a previous solution and optimizing for them. So we make that decision. And then what we do is once we've got that ideal customer in our mind's eye, we then reverse engineer their customer experience. So not only do we come up with the messaging and the hierarchy of messaging of what is important to this group of customers, but we also go through their entire customer experience from being out in the world, experiencing the problem, discovering that they exist, landing on, their website or their marketing material, onboarding into their product for the first time, becoming an engaged, happy, healthy customer, expanding in product usage, being and turning into ultimately like a high LTV customer that may even drive referrals or other types of, growth. So we go through that entire customer's experience. We reverse engineer that entire customer's experience so that we can really get a fundamental understanding of like the milestones that a customer needs to experience throughout that customer journey and throughout that relationship, so that we can then create experiences around it, but so that we can also measure. So another part of our process and what customer-led growth ultimately is, at least for us, is operationalizing that customer understanding in a way that allows the team to build amazing experiences for these customers that also influence these really meaningful leading indicators of success, like these KPIs. So for every milestone, that every moment of value that customer needs to experience, generally it's anywhere between like 5 to 8, depending on the complexity of your customers and your product. We identify KPIs for each, and then we help the team basically build experiences at each of those milestones so that we're right-sizing our messaging and the experience for them for where they are in the customer experience. So that's sort of the like end-to-end process.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the operationalizing it is probably where people who try to do this on their own, it falls apart.
100%.
Like I've been in that stage before where we do our own customer research, or maybe we outsource the customer research even, and then it's what the hell do we do with this?
Yep.
There's so much information. How do we build it? And you mentioned, the messaging, positioning, all that, but I think the other part too is now you kind of know what fish you're going after, so you can figure out where those fishing holes are. Mm-hmm. Maybe a weird analogy, but like you have that understanding. So is that part of it as well? Is like once you have that, you have your messaging. Now let's focus on the go-to-market and how we get more of these people.
Totally. So yes, we often refer to them as watering holes. So yeah, once you've got that very sort of clear understanding of the context in which your ideal customers experience the need for a solution like yours, it becomes really obvious where those watering holes are. And sometimes they are, easier to target than others. And actually, we've even worked with teams where once we've discovered what these different jobs are that customers come to this product for, we think about what sometimes the decision comes down to how not addressable the market is, but how easy or difficult it will be to market to one of these groups over the other, right? Because sometimes a leadership team or a founding team has an unfair advantage in a certain industry, as an example, or marketing to them to one of these customer jobs is easier than another. So for sure, getting that clarity on where those watering holes are, so to speak, is for sure part of it. But the whole get more customers without more marketing is really the flip side of that, which is after they've gotten to your front door, if, let's say you've got a qualified person to your front door, that entire customer experience that you serve to them, that's where we're seeing most teams sort of drop the ball. So part of the process that we go through when we're reverse engineering that experience is like, okay, this is what the experience should look like. These are where the moments of value need to be. And then we also look at the customer experience that the company is currently providing and find all of the ways that it is out of alignment. And generally, product onboarding or that early customer experience is, I'll say generally like 9 times out of 10, but I'd say it's probably even more like 99 times out of 100. That early customer experience is really dropping the ball. Positioning and messaging always stands to benefit, but I feel it's a little bit too obvious. But positioning and messaging like on the website and really speaking to the pain that you solve and highlighting the features that these customers really care about, and then serving them on the other side of that, basically that decision to give your product a try, making sure that you're providing a really relevant customer experience that's speaking to the stuff that they actually care about. And then in a B2B environment, making sure that you're aware of and taking into account any other additional buyers that might be involved in the process, right? Post acquisition, so to speak. I say acquisition, and I'm air quoting acquisition because acquisition means so many different things to so many different people. But post sign up, knowing who else is involved in the business making decision, how to account for them, how does the job to be done shift slightly, how might the messaging shift slightly for those other buyers is a really important post-acquisition thing to do and optimize for. And then again, these sort of, if we're talking about a SaaS product, what a happy, healthy, engaged customer sort of looks like in terms of how they're using the product. And then again, retention and furthermore expansion potential, after becoming like that highly engaged customer. So I'm sort of going back to that because I find we fall into this trap again of like filling the top of the funnel, like where do we go get more people? But there's so much money sitting on the table, especially in this like economic environment. I think profitability is finally on the lips of leadership teams at B2B SaaS companies more so than it has been ever before, which I think is an excellent, excellent thing. And I think there's a lot more ROI for the marketing that we're doing that is actually optimizing the post-acquisition experience. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir to you. But I just find that too many teams are sort of missing that opportunity, and product onboarding and customer onboarding is often where a lot of that is being dropped. And that's where you get all the ROI out of your marketing, is in that post sign up experience.
Yeah, it also it saves you from chasing your tail on the acquisition side. So like, say, just for a concrete example, say you get most of your business through Google Leads or Google Ads, you get leads from certain keywords.
Yeah.
You're always going to have to fund that and fund more and find new ways to grow rather than focusing, like you said, on the customers. It's funny. It's one of the reasons why I've worked in SaaS the past 10 years. Now I'm at a services company where we actually have to make money, and it's different. It's, profitability changes things. So I think that's an interesting call out to plug those holes, and don't just look at like your website conversion rate, but all the way down the funnel, concentrating on all of them.
I was just having a conversation with the team we're working with right now about, we just came through on the other side of the research and the analysis, and they're getting ready to start implementing some of the recommendations. And they're like, so like, how do we test this? And I was saying, the messaging on your website will, we basically made all these recommendations for how the messaging on the website needs to be updated. And I was like, so, well, how do we test this? And the one thing that I was making sure to caution them against was measuring the success of their messaging based on the website's conversion rate. Because it's not the website's conversion rate that tells you whether or not your messaging is working, right? Your messaging and positioning. It is the people that sign up on your website that actually turn into high LTV customers. That is the measure of success. Now, that's really hard to do, because if you have the type of product or the type of customer that takes a couple of months to get to like full, like if it's a multiplayer product, for example, where, you need multiple people on the team to be onboarded to the product to actually have them reach full value realization, that can be that's a very hard thing to measure, right? By optimizing your website with new messaging and then saying, okay, value realization is the measure of success, it's hard. But there are leading indicators of success that you can leverage, like product onboarding and product activation. So we talk a lot about defining first value with customers, and it may be, just this first product use in the product, or it may be that they saw something of value and they took even just a minor. I'm trying to think of a concrete example. So, okay, here I have this one in my mind's eye, and it's actually for a kiosk software, and it's seeing what their end customer's experience is going to look like. It's wildly, wildly important to this customer. And it is a big, big lift for this customer to actually get all the way to what their ultimate end customer's experience is going to be. There's a lot of setup involved. And so we can't wait until that customer has reached full value realization. We need to give them value much earlier in the product experience. And so we're working with this team right now to create a preview, so they can start building a preview in real time, so they can have sort of a split screen experience. And so we're working with the team now on building that preview functionality out, where it's only very minor steps that a customer has to take in order to see what it's going to look like for their end customer. So that's an example of, if you update your messaging on your website, if more customers take that, experience that moment of value, we'll know that the messaging on the website is working. So my big caution is, don't just use the website's conversion rate, because you might be converting poor fit customers. So one company that we worked with, we updated the homepage, features page, and pricing page, and their trial to pay conversion rate increased 40%. Like, we didn't touch anything post-acquisition. The website conversion rate also increased by 90%, which was great. But the thing that we were extremely excited about was the trial to pay conversion rate lift, because we didn't touch anything other than a couple of pages on the website.
Yeah. I think a lot of that goes into them kind of actually understanding what the product is as well. I don't know how many times I've saw a product, oh, this looks really cool, and I sign up and it's not something exactly what I thought, just because, it's not clear, it's not relevant. And that probably all could have been avoided, and they wouldn't have cost marketing dollars acquiring me if it was a bit clearer.
Yeah, there's like a silo. There's clear silos happening there, right? Where the marketing team is being given one performance goal for new trial signups or signups on the website, and the marketing team is just optimizing for that one thing, because that's what their performance is being measured on. When ultimately the downstream impact of that can be pretty detrimental and very, very costly.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially nowadays, people, it's not monopoly money anymore. They're not cash rich with millions and millions of dollars in funding. So I think that it's good that we got to unpack customer-led growth as well and kind of explain what that is. Because I think a lot of people, when they hear a term like that, they might think like more like what we do, like customer testimonials, and it is like adjacent to that. Like it's using the customer's voice and understanding. So I think I'm glad we got to unpack that for people to really understand the value here.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like everything, right? There's a lot of different versions. And customer-led growth is one of those things that it's only really come about in the last couple of years. And I think a lot of people have sort of latched onto it. We think about it as operationalizing an ideal customer experience. And that serves a lot of things. Like it serves product-led growth. It serves product-led sales. It serves customer marketing. It serves, customer onboarding. It serves sales. It serves all kinds of things. And so that's why we like to think of customer-led growth as being that sort of foundational understanding of the ideal customer's experience so that you can leverage all these other models, leverage all these other, growth strategies on top of it. But without a fundamental understanding of who it is that you're serving, it can be pretty chaotic and there can be a lot of sort of, spaghetti thrown at the wall, so to speak.
Yeah, it sounds so simple and obvious, but it's so often neglected.
Yeah.
Like, actually understand your customers. So, totally. I mean, if our listeners, you literally wrote the book on this. So if our customers want to learn more, connect, where should they go for that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, checking out the book is if you're interested in the process and learning more about it, the book is called Forget the Funnel. It is a deliberately short book, so you should be able to get through it in a couple of hours. We were fierce about keeping it short. But there is an accompanying workbook actually that goes along with it that's got a ton of like checklists and templates and interview scripts and all, survey templates and all kinds of stuff. So there's a workbook that goes along with it that helped us keep the book itself short. So Forget the Funnel, I would definitely check out the book. Forgetthefunnel.com is where you can find that. Also, obviously on Amazon. And we have a podcast too, which is also called Forget the Funnel. And then we also offer office hours monthly, like open office hours midday Eastern on Wednesdays. So earlier in the day for those on the West Coast. For anybody who's in-house who wants to DIY it and is really looking for like a sounding board or thought partner on how to push this type of work forward, get buy-in on this type of work, we do office hours as well, because we know that going it alone and being the lone sort of person who's bought into this can be kind of challenging. So we work with a lot of teams on how to get more buy-in across the leadership teams and stakeholders and stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'll include all those links for listeners. I'll have to check out the book too. I was reading, you had like April Dunford and Rand Fishkin leave comments. So people whose content I like, so I trust them. So I'll check it out. And yeah, Gia, thanks so much for joining me in this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to this episode. My key takeaway is around segmenting based on jobs to be done. So often it's easy to segment on firmographic or demographic data, but that's a really easy way to miss all of the nuance that's associated with the buyer's day-to-day and how certain personas are different when, if you look at the demographics and firmographics, they look similar. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or comment on the episode on Spotify. And as always, I'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode.